What if the Ottoman Empire never collapsed? Look at a map of the Middle East. Every border you see, every line between Syria and Iraq, between Jordan and Saudi Arabia, was drawn by two men who had never run those countries. They sketched it in secret during a war with a pencil, and they only got to draw it because they bet an empire was about to die. That empire was the Ottoman Empire, 600 years old. It controlled Mecca, Medina, the gateway between Europe and Asia, more land than the Roman Empire at its peak. And in 1914 it was alive, armed, and not going anywhere. 8 years later it was gone, not conquered in some glorious last stand, carved up, renamed, replaced. But here's the part nobody tells you. That collapse was not supposed to happen. It came down to a handful of decisions made by a handful of men, and almost every single one could have gone the other way. So let's actually run it. Pull one thread. Watch how much of the world you think is permanent comes apart in your hands. Here's the thread: the First World War. In 1914, the Ottomans had no business joining that war. They were broke. They were exhausted from losing the Balkan Wars 2 years earlier. Half the government did not want to fight at all, so why did they? A few men forced it, above all one man, the war minister, Enver Pasha. He looked at Europe, decided Germany was going to win, and bet the entire empire on it. And the British helped him. Britain had built 2 warships for the Ottoman Navy. Ordinary people across the empire had donated money to pay for them. Then the war started and Britain just seized both ships, kept them. That theft pushed Ottoman public opinion straight into Germany's arms. Now change it! Enver hesitates, or the faction loses the argument, or Britain hands over the ships it was paid for. The Ottoman Empire does the smart thing and stays neutral. Watch what just vanished. No Ottoman entry means no Gallipoli. Churchill's career, the founding legend of Australia and New Zealand, gone or rewritten. No Arab revolt because there is no Ottoman war to revolt against. Lawrence of Arabia stays a nobody digging up ruins. And the big one: the empire is not on the losing side. So when the war ends, it is not lying on the operating table while other men decide what to cut. Which kills the most poisonous document of the 20th century before the ink dries. The war is still going. Britain and France sit down in secret and divide up Ottoman land they do not own yet. One British diplomat, one French diplomat, Sykes-Picot. They draw a line from the Mediterranean to the mountains of Persia. France takes the top, Britain takes the bottom. That is it. That is where Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Jordan come from. Not history, not geography. 2 guys and a map of an empire they assumed was finished. In our version, that line never gets drawn. No mandate for Iraq, no mandate for Syria, no mandate for Palestine. Because mandates were just the polite legal word for carving up the loser, and our empire did not lose. Now be honest here. Keeping the Arab provinces was never going to be easy. Arab nationalism was real and it was rising. The empire knew it. But a surviving empire does not freeze. It bends. The most likely outcome is the one the empire's own reformers were already demanding before the war buried the conversation. Decentralize. Give Damascus, Baghdad, and Mecca real control over their own affairs. Istanbul keeps defense and foreign policy. Think less rigid empire, more federation, a commonwealth. And that commonwealth would be sitting on the single most valuable thing of the next 100 years. Oil, the oil fields of Iraq, the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Peninsula. In our timeline, that oil got chopped into a dozen weak little states with borders foreigners drew, and Western companies walked in and made deals with each one separately. Because each one alone was easy to push around. In this timeline, one empire owns all of it, big enough to negotiate as an equal, big enough to say no. That detonates the whole century. OPEC, the 1973 oil shock, the West tiptoeing around Gulf monarchs, all of it assumed a broken, scattered Middle East. One unified Ottoman oil power flips the leverage in every direction at once. Now the hardest threat of all, Israel and Palestine. In the real timeline, the British mandate for Palestine is the soil the entire modern conflict grows out of. The Balfour Declaration of 1917, Britain promising support for a Jewish national home, was a promise made by a country that did not control the land yet. And only expected to because the Ottomans were losing. No defeat, no British mandate, no Balfour framework as it actually played out. That does not make the question of Jewish migration disappear. Jewish communities had lived under the Ottomans for centuries. Migration to Ottoman Palestine had already started. But the structure is completely different. Now it is immigration into a province of a sovereign Muslim empire, negotiated with Istanbul, not a national home handed out by a European colonial power. The wars, the partition, the displacement we know, none of it runs the same way, because the legal foundation underneath it is simply not there. What replaces it, nobody can honestly say. Maybe calmer, maybe tense in some completely new way, but not the conflict on the news tonight. Now look back home at the empire's own heart. In our real history, the collapse produced modern Turkey, and modern Turkey was basically one man's project, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. He abolished the Sultanate. He abolished the caliphate, the religious office that made the Ottoman ruler the symbolic leader of Sunni Muslims everywhere. He swapped the alphabet, the calendar, the law, the clothes. He shoved religion out of public life and dragged the country west hard by force of will out of the wreckage. No collapse, no Ataturk revolution. The caliphate lives. Sit with that. For the entire 20th century, there is a real, continuous Muslim caliph in Istanbul. Not a memory, not a dream. An actual functioning office. Every movement in the real world that rallied around restoring the lost caliphate just lost its whole reason to exist, because the thing already exists. And it is occupied by a hereditary monarchy in Istanbul, not by anyone claiming the title from a war zone. This empire is bigger than Turkey, more religious in its public face, and it straddles Europe and Asia. So even the Cold War bends around it, a giant state holding the Bosphorus, the eastern Mediterranean, and the Gulf is not a small piece on the board. It is the square both superpowers have to fight over. Now let me argue against myself, because a thought experiment that only flatters itself is worthless. Maybe none of this saves the empire. The pressures were brutal and they were real. Arab nationalism, Armenian, Greek, and Kurdish movements, crushing debt to European banks. A multi-ethnic empire trying to survive in the exact century that was murdering multi-ethnic empires everywhere. Austria-Hungary fell in the same window, and it never even made the Ottoman mistake of backing the losing side. That is the strongest case against everything I just said. Maybe the Ottomans were simply next. But here is the other side. Empires are tougher than they look once they are dead. Europe called the Ottoman Empire the sick man of Europe in the 1850s. It then outlived that insult by 70 years. It had survived defeats and lost provinces and reinvented itself before. A decentralized Ottoman Commonwealth, religious at the core, loose at the edges, sitting on the planet's oil, was not a fantasy in 1914. It was one of the real futures on the table. The empire did not die of old age. It died because it walked into a war it could have stayed out of. And that is the whole point. You look at the map of the Middle East, and it feels permanent, like those borders grew out of the desert. They did not. They were drawn fast by outsiders during a war, on a bet about an Ottoman defeat that itself hung on a few men in a few rooms. Pull that one thread, the choice to enter the war, and it all comes apart. Sykes-Picot, gone. The mandates, gone. The Balfour framework, gone. The oil map, gone. Secular Turkey, gone. And the caliphate is still standing today? 600 years, dozens of peoples, the holy cities of two religions. The Ottoman Empire did not reach the end of some natural life. It rolled the dice in 1914 and they came up wrong. So here's the real question, the one to actually sit with. It was never just what if the Ottoman Empire survived. It is this. How much of the world you are sure is permanent was actually one decision, in one room, away from never existing at all? Think about that the next time someone shows you a map and tells you that is just how things are. If this rewired how you see that part of the world, subscribe. Because this channel pulls that same thread through history every week. And tell me in the comments, which empire should I run this experiment on next? Drop the name. I am reading them.